I'm your host, Patricia Aiken, and it is Thursday, November 19th. I am delighted to welcome back a guest, Dave Myrland. He's well known in tax circles, and there are a lot of strategies out there. The question is, do they work? Well, there are differing degrees of success, and David doesn't deal with liens and levies, but he's had substantial success in relation to criminal proceedings with just two primary issues about how the tax code is written. The Department of Justice and the courts are left entirely speechless. Dave Myrland, welcome back to Sacred Cow Barbecue. Glad you can make it tonight.
Thank you, Patricia. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can. Sound good.
How about that?
All right. So, liens and levies, those kind of stump people and are a real mess. So where does it go? Does it usually start with liens and levies and then go to criminal, or start with criminal? And how does that all work?
Depending on your conduct, of course, the government wants your money more than they want your liberty. But when the government, they have time on their hands, they'll move into criminal proceedings. And then it starts with an IRS criminal investigations division type of inquiry. And when they've developed enough evidence on you and they think they could get a conviction, they go to the Department of Justice with that, and the Department of Justice decides whether or not to seek an indictment from a grand jury.
Wow. Well, that's got to be intimidating. I know Chris Chapman had a great time in front of the grand jury. And I want to invite everybody, if they've got questions, the best place to ask questions, well, I know some people have my Skype that are listening, and you're welcome to Skype me. And also, you're welcome to come on over to InsideTheEyeLive.com. It's Dennis Fetcho from, that's his show on Saturday mornings, but we use his chat room. He doesn't mind. He's got a great show on Saturdays, and he's in Amman, Jordan, so he's not even awake right now, so he doesn't mind us using his chat room. So come on over there. If you'd like, and we'll be hanging out there if you have any questions for Dave that you'd rather type in rather than call in. So Dave, after you help people just deal with this criminal issue with the IRS and get around that. And you say there are two major issues that you deal with. How do you educate people on that?
I should underscore that I attempt to help. You can't predict corruption. And so you certainly make no guarantees. Another thing people should understand about me is that I am in no way affiliated with or a member of or a part of any anti-tax movement or patriot movement. I'm an independent paralegal, researcher, and analyst, and I use litigation as my form of activism. I have nothing to do with the anti-tax movement. My only involvement is to try to help people that are in trouble because they took the bait and did something that the anti-tax movement suggests you do. I've been a realist since the middle of the 1990s when I discovered that you can't even get, you can't even get the courts to interpret tax statutes. And if that's the case, when you do what the anti-tax movement says to do, you're establishing a permanent relationship with a corrupt organization. Who in their right mind would do that to themselves, to their families? So I've been teaching since the middle of the 1990s that the best you can do in America, because we have no court, and the courts are the judges, we have no judges that aren't corrupt to their core. And so you establish a home business and gather all the allowable deductions H&R Block says the IRS will permit, and that's the best you can do, is to lower your tax liability by conducting a business at home and channeling your expenses, your costs, into the right categories of allowable deductions. And at the end of the year, you look at the amount you ended up having to pay for that year, and you view it as the price of admission to the shouting match with your congressman. And I have to tell you, I've got a real problem with this push by some candidates for a flat tax or a fair tax when this push is made by people that don't even know what the tax code says. They didn't bother to interpret it first. And if you were to switch to a flat tax, I demand you ask this question first. Would I just be legitimizing what at present and what has been for decades an illegal revenue stream? If we have never even owed this tax, you got no business converting it to a flat tax where the government still makes this revenue we've never even owed. So with two primary arguments, getting back to criminal proceedings and the help I offer, get ready to write. I'm going to give you an email address and a website address.
Before you do that, Dave, let's remind everybody that you're not giving out tax or legal advice here. You're not an accountant or a tax attorney, and so
yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay, very good. I'll stay out of your way. Go for it. It's your show. Go ahead.
The help I offer, is a method whereby I give you an understanding of a couple of very particular issues that are fully briefed and supported with Supreme Court case law and appellate decisions. They're statutory issues. And what I'm hoping to do with this is to acquaint you with a couple of issues that are very fundamental regarding IRS enforcement that make you impossible or much more difficult to obtain a guilty verdict against. And when you have the government in free-form enforcement of the law and you've read enough of the law to figure out what they're doing wrong, you are somebody that they don't want on the witness stand because you're saying all the wrong things. That's what I try to provide. Now, as Patricia was saying, nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis. Believe it. That's been my disclaimer for more than 10 years. So you can't predict corruption, and so I don't predict success. You stay in the fight until the fight is over, but you don't stand around doing an end zone dance after that either, because the government may just feel they should come back after you. So the success happens without a docket number, because once they get an indictment, they steamroll you, and the courts are on the government side every time. I prove it, and I prove it, and I prove it, so that once they get the indictment, they'll steamroll you to get the conviction. My work takes place before they consider going to the grand jury, to acquaint them with the fact that I know enough about the tax code that you shouldn't indict me, because if you're not willful in violation of the tax evasion statute, and if you're not willful in violation of the failure to file statute, then you're not guilty. And willfulness is a three-pronged test: having a legal duty, knowing and believing you have the duty, and failing to perform the duty. Everybody else attacks the second one. I don't believe I have a duty. I attack the first one. I'm the only one. I don't have a legal duty to believe in the first place. And when you can explain to the court, when you can explain to the Department of Justice and the IRS that the tax code was never written to apply to citizens of the United States. That's what they say I am. I'm going to traverse. Sure, I'm a citizen of the United States. Knowing that, I then set about proving that the tax code has never been written to apply to citizens of the United States. That's the first and biggest question ever asked about the tax code. Does it apply in the 50 states? The second question is, if I were subject to the tax code, does it impose an income tax on the value of my personal services, when all I do is sell my labor to an employer, to a customer, whatever? Does the tax code impose an income tax on that amount that I receive from an unrelated party that wants my services? Those two questions are explained in two very particular arguments. I told you to get ready to write. I'm going to give you a website where these are explained in full. You want to go to wevgov.com, wevgov.com, as in we the people versus government, wevgov.com. Go to the federal income taxation page. I don't like to ask for donations, so really what I prefer is if anybody feels generous, philanthropic, order the materials that are on the website. That's how I'd really rather spread information than solicit charity. Really, you should have these materials. I'm the only one that can say that since 2006, more than a dozen indictments have been prevented by my process. Now, on the left-hand side of that website, on the home page, you click on Enter, and you'll enter the website, and then on the left-hand side is the menu column. At the top of the menu column, click on YouTube 2, and it'll take you to my YouTube channel. There's free seminars there. Back to the website, on the left-hand side is the menu column. Click on Federal Income Taxation, and it'll take you to a page that explains these two primary issues, these two questions about the tax code that I answer by looking at particular statutes. 5 statutes. Can you handle that? 2 arguments, 5 statutes. Now, the Patriot movement doesn't like me, and I don't like the Patriot movement. They refuse to do the work. I'm the one working for the people that have landed in prison because of the Patriot movement. Let's just call it the movement. And you got Pete Hendrickson, my favorite whipping boy, who wrote a roll of toilet paper called Cracking the Code and landed a bunch of people in prison. He caused the lien and levy of countless parcels of real estate and paychecks and bank accounts and the destruction of mortgages, marriages, reputations, jobs across the United States. Got out of prison last spring and was immediately out pushing his book again. And in fact, last December, one particular case of which I'm aware, the case of James R. Back in Alaska, he was sentenced to 16 months in federal prison. He was doing fine. He was making over $125,000 a year as an Alyeska pipeline technician in Alaska, and filed several Pete Hendrickson tax returns and was found guilty on each of 7 counts. So Pete Hendrickson has already been to prison and got out of prison, and his victims are still going to prison. I got a real problem with that. Make no mistake about it. I thump on the Patriot movement every chance I get because they're a bunch of derelicts that didn't do the work. And the fruits of having done the work are right there on my website on the federal income taxation page. You'll see 2 arguments presented. The first one is the government says I'm a citizen of the United States, and that means I can't be subject to Social Security because Social Security is written to apply to citizens of possession, and I give you the statutory definition of citizens from the chapters that impose Social Security, chapters 2, 21, and 23. I also provide a few other statutory provisions in support of that contention, like 7655 in the tax code, of course, unless I say otherwise when I mention a statute, it's going to be in the tax code. 7655 says for taxes imposed in the possessions, see chapters 2 and 21. That's pretty clear. Chapter 2, Social Security self-employed. Chapter 21, FICA, employee Social Security, or the payroll tax. So there goes those 2 taxes. And when you also have the same definition of citizen in Chapter 23, the employer's excise tax for Social Security. Unemployment insurance. That leaves just Chapter 1 of the tax code. And in Chapter 1, there is no statutory definition of citizen, and so they wrote a regulation that says citizens of the United States owe this tax. And my argument, my objection is the 16th Amendment says Congress can lay and collect this tax. This is just a regulation. You have to have a statute. Do you have a statute that implicates me? The government can't talk. Right there. Dead. The whole tax code. It doesn't apply to the individual citizen of the United States because we're only named in a regulation if, in fact, we're citizens of the United States. The second argument you'll see about the bottom third of that page is about Tax Code Section 83. And you'll see there, first, why I would focus on Section 83. Tax court, the appellate court, and the IRS Chief Counsel all agree Section 83 explains how to tax all compensation. I'm the only one in the known universes that teaches this. It's been plagiarized by the Family Guardian, but I've got briefs going back all the way to 1993 and a manual that I wrote in 1994 that you'll see on the products page. I added 30 pages to it March before last and published it. So Section 83 doesn't say that the whole paycheck's gross income. You'll see there on that page it says only the excess over the amount paid is gross income. And the amount paid is defined as the value of any property that I paid for my paycheck. Labor is property. Its value is what an unrelated party is willing to give me, which is my contract value, and only the excess over that value is gross income.
Okay, so let's give people an example of that, Dave. I hear the concept, and I've heard you talk about this before, and so I'm on board with it. But let's just give somebody, the nuts and bolts of that. That means if I go out to a job and I have contract with someone, I'm in sales, and I get so much commission per sale. So I have a contract with them for that commission. Is that income?
So the most important part of this was that the government can't refute it. They can't go on record with their own interpretation of Section 83. Checkmate. The concepts at the baseline, meaning the fundamentals that you have to be acquainted with to understand how to interpret the statute, you need to know first that labor is property. Secondly, you have to know how to calculate the fair market value of property. The fair market value of property is determined through the terms of an arm's length transaction. An arm's length transaction is said of a transaction negotiated between two unrelated parties acting in their own best interest under no compulsion to buy or sell, all relevant facts disclosed. That's exactly the contract that I have with my employer, with my client that consults with me, with my client that might hire me to climb up the tree in their front yard and chop the top off before the storm season comes. It might be the client that sits down at the counter in the diner that I run and wants breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast. And then after the payment is made to me for my services of topping the tree or making the meal or giving my consultation on whatever topic or subject or cutting their hair, whatever I am in this free enterprise system we have here, whatever services I offer, when they pay me, I have received the fair market value of my services because they are unrelated parties that didn't have to contract with me. They're under no compulsion. Now I pay my costs. I have to pay, if I run a diner, I have to pay my dishwasher, my waitress. I have to pay for the energy, the electricity to the building, my purveyors that I buy the milk, eggs, toast, and bacon from, and the rest of the things that I serve my customers. When I'm done paying all of, or accounting for all of my costs, I separate those from the total received, my gross receipts, and I put those in the deductible column, Section 212 of the tax code. In the case of an individual, there shall be allowed as a deduction all ordinary and necessary expenses paid or incurred in the production and collection of income. So costs are deductible. What's left is separate from costs, it would be profit if it weren't for the fact that I had not yet accounted for the value of the services I provided. Now I look at the rest of that, and if I didn't receive anything over what somebody agreed to pay me for my services, I have no excess over the amount paid, to including gross income. And remember, everything I'm telling you is something the government can't even refute. I've been up against them in court over and over and over and over and over again. They will not even go on record with the government's interpretation of Tax Code Section 83. It's a forgotten paragraph of law.
Yeah, they just they don't want. Didn't an attorney ask a judge for a protection order so they didn't have to answer you once? Was that you?
That particular case did not involve Tax Code Section 83, but you're talking about Walden versus United States, 2005. If you went to my YouTube channel and watched the seminar called Key to the Code, it is an explanation of the argument that I'm only named in a regulation. Otherwise, the tax code couldn't be applied to me. And the last, 30 seconds of that video is an actual photograph of that protective order where Jim Walden called me in, say, March of 2005. I've been in this a long time. My treatise was done in early 1994. So I'm not new to any of this, and the work I did before 1994 still stands as the single most competent and exhaustive analysis of the tax code ever completed. So he calls me in March of 2005 and says, I think I might be indicted for failure to file. I never heard your name before. A friend of mine says you do good work. Any ideas? And the first thing I asked him was, how would you like an exhibit that proves that you sued the United States for proof the tax code applies to Americans and they can't debate you on 3 or 4 statutes? He says, let's go for it. And so I briefed the argument that you see explained at the top of the federal income taxation page on wevgov.com. And there was 3 portions of the brief, or 3 different aspects of the brief, and under each one was a set of questions that you have to answer to prove me wrong. In total, 12 questions. Issues A, B, and C, 3, 4, and 5 questions respectively, a total of 12 questions. And he filed this lawsuit and said the only remedy I want out of filing this lawsuit is answers to those questions if I'm wrong. And instead of answering the questions, instead of out-briefing me, Assistant U.S. Attorney Stephen Bass asked the court for a protective order against the 12 questions. And Judge Lee Yeagle in Austin, Texas, U.S. District Court, issued a protective order against Jim Walden asking those questions of the government. Checkmate.
And what happened to the case? Did they have? He gets a protective order. What happens to the case from there?
That was the only relief he wanted, was answers to the questions. So basically the court said you can't have them. But that protective order is exactly what I suggested he would get, is an exhibit proving that he sued the United States for proof that the tax code applies to Americans and they can't debate him on 3 or 4 statutes. Checkmate.
That's impressive. So
now, I got a call last March, maybe February, from a guy in South Dakota. And he said, I'm getting letters from the Criminal Investigations Division of the IRS. Any suggestions? He heard me on a conference call somewhere. And now, if you want to write this down, folks, I have a TalkShoe archive, talkshoe.com, TalkShoe, talkshoe.com. You want to look for show number 59615. No confidence. That's my archive of taped interviews on radio shows such as Patricia's here and other shows that I chose to do on my own, and my own radio shows. from a couple of different networks, and I cover a lot of different topics. On TalkShoe, you also want to seek out call number 87488, 87488 and 59615. 87488 is the call I do every Wednesday and Saturday with Christopher Chapman on American Liberties Call, where we discuss almost every show is about taxes. So there's entire archives of calls. Now, this gentleman calls me from South Dakota. He heard me on a conference call or a radio show and says, I'm getting letters from the Criminal Investigations Division of the IRS. Any ideas? And I said, how would you like an exhibit showing that you sued the United States for proof that the tax code applies to Americans and they can't debate you on a few statutes? He says, let's go for it. And so we did it again. And the issues were very well laid out. In January 2006, I filed a criminal complaint and briefing with 80 members of Congress. That was submitted in this court case this year in South Dakota behind the civil complaint. And I'm asking in that civil complaint that the court declare that this regulation they wrote saying citizens of the United States owe this tax is an invalid exercise of executive authority because the statute, Section 1 of the Code, the graduated income tax, makes no reference whatsoever to anybody's citizenship. And so this regulation is void. And we also asked the court to say, the plaintiffs are on file with Congress and with this court now with a sworn statement saying they don't believe for 1 minute that the tax code imposes a tax. Will the court please declare that if they fail in the future to file income tax returns or fail to pay what the government says is an income tax, that they're not willful because they don't believe they have a duty for 1 minute. They shouldn't have to live in fear, wondering if the government is going to indict them. So there are very basic questions asked of the court under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is Title V, Section 701 through 706, and it provides that an agency action shall be reviewed by the court that gets the complaint for abuses of discretion, actions that are in excess of statutory authority, and a couple of other things. So it's a major attack, a full frontal assault on the IRS in this lawsuit. And do you have an advertisement coming up soon, Patricia?
Just mine. We're good till the top of the hour, Dave. So since you're promoting it, I'll just tell you right now. We're listener and volunteer supported here at freedomslips.com. You're listening to Sacred Cow Barbecue. My guest tonight is Dave Myrland from wevgov.com. And we just want to encourage you, definitely check out Dave's site if everybody is impacted by this income tax information. And so go on over there, be supportive to Dave, buy some of his great information that he has. I mean, it's ironclad. And also make a donation at Freedom Slips when you can. If everyone would just kind of throw in $2 a month, we wouldn't have to make these kind of appeals. Freedom isn't free, and it takes money to run the station. So we appreciate everyone listening, and we appreciate all the donations that come in. So thank you all. And Dave, back to you. Go ahead.
Everybody, do that. You're witnessing efforts, patriotic endeavors made by two good Americans, both Patricia and myself, and your support is definitely appreciated. So in this lawsuit, filed this year, May 20th, the government, instead of providing it, and the lawsuit was brutal. It explains, here it is, 20 years after I wrote my treatise, I filed a criminal complaint in 2006 with 80 members of Congress, and all this time and in all these cases where the court's been confronted with these issues, they haven't gone on record with any reference to Section 83 and its regulations. They refuse. Well, while in fact, at the same time, they say it explains how to tax all compensation. So I put the court and the DOJ right in the same position I have in all these other challenges. And instead of proving that the law operates in a way contrary to how I briefed it, the government comes in with a motion to dismiss. on a bunch of trivial things, so saying that everything's frivolous. Oh, it's frivolous for me to ask not to be kept in suspense as to whether or not I'll be indicted, when all you have to do to cure the dilemma is tell me your interpretation of the law? Spoken like a public servant. So I wrote the opposition for the plaintiffs to file, and then the government wrote a rebuttal to my opposition. So when a motion is filed, it's a three-phase argument. They file the motion, I file the opposition, and then they file a rebuttal, and we wait. And right now we've been waiting more than 60 days for a decision out of the court as to whether or not the lawsuit can move forward. That means they're taking their time because they're going to dismiss the lawsuit, as I predicted from the start. I told the plaintiffs the best you'll get out of this is the right to say, I even sued the United States for proof the tax code applies to Americans and imposes a tax on the value of my labor, and they can't debate me on 4 or 5 statutes. That's profoundly simple, okay?
It's profoundly frustrating is what it is.
The tax code is not advanced. It's simply voluminous. And my treatise is the result of I studied all of the tax code, and I learned 100 times more than what I teach because I didn't find an argument everywhere I looked. I can prove they're stealing pennies, and I can prove they're stealing everything. And so I only took the needles in the haystack that mean something and put all the needles in one place. There's about 40 of them. And then when I want to make an argument, I make an argument out of just several of those needles at a time, and I clear the rest of them away, and I make an argument based on just a few provisions at a time, but those provisions happen to be at the very foundation of the authority the IRS claims to have. So it was complex to figure it all out, but what you get in my work is not research. You get the results of research. The research is done. It was done in 1994. By 1998, I had written 5 clients' cases all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. 2 of those were docketed past the clerks to the justices before being denied. And everywhere in between then and now, never has the government gone on record with an interpretation of Section 83 except in one case. On the Fourth Circuit, a tax court case, Talmadge versus Commissioner, and they looked at Section 83 and they said, you can't deduct the value of your labor as a cost because you didn't buy your labor from somebody else before you sold it. And my argument was, excuse me, but this regulation says the amount paid is the value of any money or property. Where's your authority to exclude labor from the term any? And they refuse to provide that authority. It's arbitrary. They simply exclude labor because they want to. And it's the difference between having your paycheck in the category of profit or the category of cost. Now, I have, as you'll see at the bottom of that page on my website, wevgov.com, on the federal income taxation page, there are 2 crap tons, of cases that say you have to have a law that allows you to exclude something from the term any. If the law doesn't provide for an exclusion, any means all of it. So now when I brief Section 83 and they try to brief against me, they don't even cite the Talmadge decision, even though the Fourth Circuit said based on tax court's findings, we agree with tax court. And I proved that this regulation that says any property, it has to be considered all-inclusive because they have no law that allows them to simply exclude labor from that purview. Checkmate. So I've done all this work and narrowed the argument down to precisely this. And it's all on wevgov.com for free. Watch my YouTube seminars on the link at the top of the menu column. It says YouTube 2. Listen to TalkShoe.com. Type in their caller ID window 59615. That's my archive. And the American Liberties archive is 87488. Here's an email address. You can contact American Liberties for more information if you feel like donating more money. than it takes to buy all of my materials, feel free by contacting American Liberties at this email address, AmericanLiberties.llc, AmericanLiberties.llc@gmail.com, AmericanLiberties.llc@gmail.com. Talk to me.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to mute when I'm typing stuff in, so I'm putting stuff into the chat room for you, Dave.
Okay.
And so I have to mute to be able to make that happen, so we don't have a ton of keystrokes happening here. Hold on.
So
And I want to clarify the no confidence talk show. That's 59615.
Correct.
Okay. There we go. Talkshoe.com 59615 or talkshoe.com 87488. You've got plenty of archives there as well.
Oh, there's all kinds of shows there. They're free to download. Please download those calls, and you'll find me talking a bunch of different topics on 59615, no confidence. For instance, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorizations Act. There will be a show. I can't remember which episode it is. You click on the little blue bubble beside the title of the show, and there's one that's going to say the National Defense Authorizations Act doesn't even apply in America. And so all this brouhaha made over the fact that the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the Hedges versus Obama appeal is groundless. And you have accomplished attorneys, really, even the likes of John Whitehead of the Rutherford Foundation, an accomplished civil rights attorney, and you listen to my explanation of the decision in the Hedges versus Obama case. This is a case where reporters and activists got an attorney, paid the attorney to file a lawsuit against the National Defense Authorizations Act saying, hey, this act of yours says that the government can put us in prison and hold us till the end of hostilities, and we know the war on terror will never end. And they could do that just for us dissenting, and they're going to hold us without habeas corpus.
Oh, well, white supremacists are now like the number one terrorists, according to the government.
And that's removed from this topic about this discussion of that particular law. So district court looked at this claim and they said, that's terrible. I better issue an injunction against the United States enforcing this in the United States. And so they issued an injunction against the government. The government appealed to the Second Circuit Appellate Court, one level below the Supreme Court, and said they're off their rocker. This Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorizations Act doesn't create any new authority to detain Americans that the president didn't already have, and these people lack standing because they're Americans in the 50 states. And so the law wouldn't even apply to them because they're Americans in the 50 states. And so they don't have standing, case dismissed, and the injunction was lifted. And everybody said, what's the Second Circuit doing? Now we can be arrested, blah, blah. And they didn't even look at the decision. And they appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, that's fine. And so everybody thought it was doomsday scenario, when if you read the Second Circuit decision on this, you can see they decided the merits simply by ruling that these people had no standing. And everybody's still up in arms about it. They got a chapter in every state under pandaunite.org, an organization that tried to get a chapter in every state to defeat the enforcement of the NDAA, and they're all spitting in the wind. So,
well, Dave,
there's only so much I can do, you know.
We're not usually a legal show. Sometimes we do some law around here, but not all the time. We talk about other issues. So why don't you explain the importance of standing and what that actually is?
Standing. It's the competence of a particular party to be before the court. I lack standing if if your neighbor, Patricia, if your neighbor had a tree that blew over in the windstorm and broke down the fence and landed on top of a car that you had parked in the driveway beside the fence, and you had a bunch of damage to your car, if I sued the neighbors for your damages, I'd be suing without standing because I'm not the damaged party.
Okay, good explanation. Thanks.
These people that sued under the National Defense Authorizations Act are people to whom the law would not have applied, and so they lacked the standing to sue. They weren't bound to be damaged by the enforcement. And the reason that was true is a reason that explains the NDAA doesn't even apply to Americans in the 50 states.
Well, have they tried to use it in the 50 states?
They did not try to use it against these people. These people simply sued under the Declaratory Judgments Act, which is an act that gives you access to the court to prevent a possible controversy. It's a way to avoid controversy. You can sue in advance saying, I want a declaration that is inapplicable to me, or that it's unconstitutional, or it's in excess of their authority, whatever, to prevent me being damaged in advance of the damage actually happening.
Interesting.
And they sued to prevent the enforcement because they're just activists and reporters, and the government said they don't have standing to sue because this law they're trying to challenge is unconstitutional, wouldn't be applied to them in the first place.
Well, a lot of people put a lot of work into that panda thing. I know some of them here in Vegas.
You're fading out. I lost you.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to get my volume straightened out here. How's this better? Can you hear me now?
Louder.
Okay, how's this?
A little better.
Okay. Well, I'm just kind of watching this. And, a lot of people put a lot of work into that panda thing. They were all up in arms about it. It was before my time here in Vegas, but I know they went to the county council and made a big fuss. Good, they could have saved themselves a lot of time.
Well, on a show by John B. Wells, I can't remember what the show, Caravan to Midnight, something like that.
Yeah, uh-huh.
He interviewed the guy that put together Panda Unite, Panda, P-A-N-D-A, People Against the National Defense Authorization, and they dropped an A off of the title, pandaunite.org. And he says, and I really come down on him hard for this because I really believe the opposite. He's a young guy, probably in his late 20s, and he says, nobody ever got anywhere with using education. You have to act. You have to be out in the street. You have to be proactive, and you have to be belligerent. And you go out and you educate people. Well, excuse me, you started by saying that education doesn't get you anywhere and you have to be an activist, but as an activist, you're going to go out and educate people without an education? What a moron. And I tear his wings off on my radio show there that you'll find in my archive that he's got, and I include a clip of him from that show. He doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's out there saying he's educating people when he professes to believe that no education is necessary. You got to spare me. This is the law can humiliate you, just as water can humiliate you. If you don't know what you're doing, you get in a boat and you go out in the choppy seas, it's going to humiliate you because you don't know what the heck you're doing. And you have to respect law like you have to respect the ocean. It'll kill you. And
Dave, someone in the chat room is bringing up foreclosures. I don't know if I can get you off track here for a second with that. But he says the bank has no standing to sue for foreclosure if they are not the true lender. I know this is of interest to some people. Do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll give you two different views of that contention. First and foremost, are you, when you get a mortgage, are you in fact the borrower of money on hand, or are you the co-creator of money out of thin air? The fact of the matter is, they wouldn't have the money to lend you if they hadn't received your promissory note. So they create money out of thin air by virtue of the fact that you signed a promissory note to pay the mortgage. Then they create the money, and so you're not a borrower of money. You're a co-creator. And secondly, if they have sold that mortgage down the road, either in a bundled security or on its own, fatally, then they have no standing to sue because they don't have an equity stake in the mortgage any longer, but they're willing to sue, and the courts are willing to protect them when they do it. The judges are as corrupt as the day is long. America has no judges. America has no courts. Those both mean the same thing. The judges are corrupt, and so America has no courts. A country with no courts is not a country. It's an open sewer surrounded by razor wire.
I couldn't agree more.
And so I totally agree with the gentleman that typed into the chat about how standing. Does the bank have standing? Well, only if they have an equity stake in that mortgage. And if you can prove they sold it down the road, you can, and especially if it was bundled, if it was part of a bundling of securities together, it has become a different type of security than a mortgage, and therefore the terms of the mortgage are not enforceable. Only the regulations and rules applicable to that type of security are now enforceable. And so, yes, in many ways, the bank can lose standing to sue for foreclosure, but the problem is getting a court to go your direction when, in fact, the banks own the court.
Yeah, that's really hard to get them to acknowledge that, especially when the Federal Reserve I think it was out of Chicago, wrote that book about what mortgages were and what fiat money was, and they actually admitted that you take that promissory note, they turn it into the discount window at the Federal Reserve, and they get 9 times the value of your promissory note. Not only did you create that money, you created 9 times the value of that promissory note of that amount.
That's the essence of fractionalized banking you just described.
It's unbelievable how America has slid this far and become this corrupt. And it has to do, and of course, people like I've had on recently, like Clint Richardson and Mark Emery and stuff, we all talk about the bankruptcy, and that's when it came. Modern money mechanics. That's right, Anonymous. Thanks. So.
And the banker wears different hats, I think is the name of another publication from the Federal Reserve. And those are cited. Everybody get ready to write. You can get my brief on this. I briefed the question as to whether or not you're a borrower or a co-creator when you get a mortgage. I briefed this. An organization contacted me in the early 2000s and wanted me to work for them. They said they win through attrition on debt collection matters. And I said, where's your brief? And they didn't even have a brief of these matters that they said were valid reasons to abandon credit card debt. And they gave me a bunch of authorities, and I wrote the brief for them to use to present their argument to courts. If you want this brief, contact AmericanLiberties.llc@gmail.com, AmericanLiberties.llc@gmail.com. And the nice man will respond to you. His name's Chris Chapman. He's my promoter. And for $20 donation, we'll send you that brief. It's in PDF format. It's an expose on exactly this topic, but impeccably written. I've written against the government's best tax attorneys for years and against the Department of Justice in criminal action. So when I say I've briefed something, it's going to be on par with the government's best attorneys. Trust me, my writing style is impeccable and highly technical, so expect the best.
Well, I can certainly agree with that. I've seen some of your work, Dave, and it is excellent. So I'm sorry, and I want to apologize to everyone. My audio says that I'm way loud here, and I cannot turn it down. I've been doing everything over here to try to turn that down. So we should be coming up on a break here. It should have started already, so maybe something's wrong with the station, and we may just have to talk straight through. I'm not sure. So if we hear the music, we'll give it a stop. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to pose for Dave, you can do it over here on Skype. I see. I want to say hi to Heidi on Skype and say hello to everybody in the chat room and thank them for coming out tonight. And it's kind of quiet. Everybody's listening here, so we've got some other topics that we want to discuss. So, Dave, boy, we timed that pretty darn good. Hey, every now and then things work out. I want to say welcome back to everybody in the chat room over at InsideTheEyeLive.com, and thanks to Dennis Fetcho and his. He's a great host on Saturday mornings. You should tune in and hear his show sometime if you haven't before. And I want to say welcome back to Dave Myrland from WeVGov.com. We've been having a very interesting conversation about what he knows about the tax code and criminal intent. And before we go to criminal intent, Dave, somebody on Skype had a question about securitization, and I don't even have the full word. Hold on, let me see. They were asking. All right, ignore this click. Okay, there we go. Oh, this is what she's saying. Oh, securitization audits. See if you can follow the money on the note, like which trust it's in, who sold it, for how much, and so on. The bank gets the gold pot when they liquidate you. Then they sell your property. Crooks, no coincidence. It's all timing. Does he know the banks use a 1031 exchanges? Oh, well, I didn't know the banks use, those are land exchanges, 1031 exchanges. They reinstate the basis value. Much, much fraud, and they sell your account even if they've foreclosed on you. Paper has eternal life in it, it seems. Well, that's a great point, Tara. So, Dave, you want to comment on any of that?
I don't do foreclosures. The securitization audit is a forensic examination of the pathway of the original promissory note, who it's been sold to, where it's at right now, who is the exact owner of the promissory note. And this is in the method of ferreting out exactly what kind of challenges to make to the foreclosure action that you experience. And it's an entire field I can't really do justice to. I haven't bothered to keep up with it. I'm not working on that. Most of the work I do is for criminal proceedings in U.S. District Court, or preventing those proceedings by educating people about the tax code in advance. Now, this Texan, he's a rancher, and he's driving down the road in North Dakota and gets a flat tire in front of this other guy's place, and the North Dakotan comes out and says, "Hey, friend, you got car problems?" And the Texan says, "Oh, yeah, gosh, I'm driving down the road, I get a flat tire, and I look in my trunk, and I think my boy has gone and borrowed my tire iron. Can you help me out?" And the North Dakotan says, "Oh, yeah, I got two of them. Why don't I give you one of those?" And the Texan says, "I can't thank you enough. You know, I got a spread down in Texas. How big's your place here?" And the North Dakotan says, "Gosh, I hadn't thought about it in a little while." And he looks both ways down the road, and he says, "I guess you go down the road, you can just see it. There's a broken farm implement beside the road with a bunch of weeds growing up through it. Take a right. You go back along the side of the property, it slopes off, and you can just see the top of a little tree sticking up. That's where I share the corner of the irrigation canal with the next fella. Take a right, back along the back of the property line, way out to that little outbuilding you can see. Last winter in the blizzard, you got the roof blown off of it. The kids and the dogs are playing by it. Take a right, back to the road. We're down there a ways. You see the group of mailboxes. That's the corner. Take a right and come back here to the driveway. How big's your place?" And the text says, "Gosh, how do I put this? Okay. We could start at my driveway, like we did here at yours. We could get in my pickup truck. I could drive 12, maybe 16 hours and still not be halfway around my ranch." And the North Dakotan says, "You know, I used to have a pickup truck just like that."
I like it. Oh, gosh. Well, good. Tara's saying she really knows a lot about this foreclosure fraud, and she says when she wins, she'll be my guest. All right, I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to hold you to it. Okay.
There's so many different areas that are worthy of attention because there's so much abuse, and the law is so it's awesome. It is overpowering, overwhelming, and you really have to choose a specialty. And so, by me telling you that there's things I don't do, that I don't know anything about, I hope you see that as a level of courtesy paid to the person that asked the question. I'm not going to tell you something in a field I don't practice. So it's the worst thing I could do to you is to tell you something about which I'm really uninformed.
Well, the subjects that people are interested in and involved in by necessity are so huge. I mean, it takes a life study to wrap your head around just one of them. So when somebody can be, good on several fronts, I'm always impressed. So believe me, it pays to specialize in that. Criminal intent and the criminal charges against the IRS, those are your specialty, and that's what we love to hear about. So, Dave, I'm going to turn it back to you. You want to talk more about intent and that you've got a seminar for that?
Sure, and as you listen to me, everybody out there, I hope you keep in mind that I've read easily in excess of 4,000 decisions on the federal appellate level and U.S. Supreme Court level, and with a smattering of state cases in there. And you don't read those for fun. You don't just sit down with a glass of sherry in the evening by the fireplace and read case law. You read cases because you have to study that topic because it came up either something that could aid you in litigation or something that you have to argue against when another party brings it up against you. So it's actually in the trenches, my work in the trenches that forced me to study all these different angles you'll hear me discuss from time to time if you download my shows. Now, criminal intent is known as criminal intent or mens rea or scienter or malice aforethought, meaning when I committed this act, I knew it was against the law, but I intended to do harm. And if you lack that intent under a lot of statutes, especially the common law crimes that have been codified like larceny, they have to presume that the statute includes criminal intent. They have to prove criminal intent to prove you guilty. And the government has set this requirement aside because since I started in litigation in 1994, 1993, all I saw were innocent people going to prison. How in the world can you believe you're breaking the law? How can you have an intent to break the law if you're filing tax returns under penalties of perjury, claiming your labor as a deduction, or any of this other great stuff that the Patriot Movement comes out with? These people don't believe they're breaking the law. They're signing documents under penalties of perjury and filing with the government right there on public record. How can you say that person believes that they're breaking the law? And so I saw this standard set aside for over 20 years. And then this summer, the Supreme Court, one case, they issued a lengthy memorandum decision. And in the other case, with one sentence, they said, based on this other case where we wrote the memorandum, based on this other case, this conviction is overturned too. So 2 different federal convictions were vacated because of the criminal intent aspect. The first one, some greasy rapper put a bunch of overtly violent rhetoric on Facebook about his ex-wife, saying that, the best place to launch a mortar at her house would be from the cornfield beside her house because there's an access road you can get away on. And he said, I don't care about the state and federal police. I got enough explosives to take care of them. And he said, hell hath no fury like an angry man with a shotgun in a middle school. Just really over the top. And he was indicted and convicted for making an interstate threat to injure or kidnap the person of another. 18 U.S.C. 875C. Interstate commerce, that means on the internet, through the mail or the telephone, email. And at trial, he said, I want a jury instruction that says I have to have acted with criminal intent. And the court said, no, I'm not going to give you that. We're going to instruct the jury that if a reasonable person reads what you said and they think they're in danger, you're guilty. And he went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said he was entitled to that jury instruction because criminal intent is required in this threat statute, and so you should have instructed the jury that he's only guilty if he believes he violated the law. And we hereby vacate the conviction. And in the next case, just a month later, the Supreme Court issued a decision saying, based on that first one, her conviction's overturned. She had contacted a radio show through email, I think it was, saying, well, we ought to go down to the school board and teach them about the Second Amendment. Yeah, let's raise some hell. And she was indicted and convicted of issuing the threat, but her argument was the indictment fails to allege criminal intent. And so the indictment is void. It violates my rights under the Sixth Amendment because it doesn't advise me of the nature of the charges against me. And it proves that the government didn't go to the grand jury with all essential elements of the offense. They didn't convince the grand jury that I acted with criminal intent. And the Supreme Court said, your conviction's vacated in one sentence. They didn't even issue a memorandum decision. It was a summary disposition. And so both of those convictions were overturned for a lack of criminal intent. I said, there's that standard I've been looking for all this time, 20 years of litigation. How come innocent people are going to prison? Because the government omits that from every case, and if you don't argue it, the government gets away with it. And so here's some cases. I dredged up a whole bunch of other cases, and I've made a course about it, where if you order this flash drive, it's the last product on the product page on weebgov.com. It comes on a flash drive, and you open up there's two folders inside the folder. You open up the first folder, part one, and you click on the video file, and it opens up. It's a screen capture video where I navigate that folder right there on the screen and give you an audio narration of the contents of the folder, and I read through those cases so you can sit back and watch instead of having to look at the case and scroll through it yourself. You can just sit there and watch while I read the highlighted portions of the decisions that I review in part one. In part two, I've gone and downloaded the losing arguments. The government argued a certain way. In fact, in the Supreme Court, the government wrote for 30 pages, hey, we don't have to have criminal intent here. What are you talking about? 30 pages. The government truly believes that they don't have to do this. And the Supreme Court says, yes, you do. And so what this shows is that literally thousands, tens of thousands of federal and state convictions are primed to be vacated. So I went and got the district court memorandums and the appellate court memorandums where the court said you don't have to have criminal intent. If another party believes that they're under threat, then you're guilty. Those are the losing arguments. So you can see both sides of this. And also in the case of the rapper that got his conviction overturned, the Supreme Court cited U.S. versus Morissette, 1952, or Morissette versus the United States, whatever. It was an appeal all the way to the Supreme Court where in 1952, this guy was found guilty of stealing government property. And the appellate court agreed. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court starts by saying, this case is totally insignificant. I don't know what we're doing here, except for the fact that the jury was instructed that it doesn't matter criminal intent. He admitted that he took this metal, these scrap metal pieces from this government property, and so it doesn't matter if he had criminal intent or not. And he admits it himself. And the Supreme Court said this case is entirely insignificant except for the way the jury was instructed. and it has far-reaching ramifications throughout federal criminal law. And so they heard the case, and they said that this is the case of a man who went deer hunting on government property like everybody else did. It was in Michigan, 1948. He had received an honorable discharge from the military. In summertime, he was a fruit stand operator, and in wintertime, he drove a scrap iron salvage truck and ran a salvage business and truck driver for a living in the winter. Had good standing in the community. And on this tract of land that the government had, they had established a practice bombing range. They had metal cylinders 40 inches long filled with sand and enough gunpowder to leave a puff of smoke so they could track the bombing success on their practice target. And then after the range became cluttered with casings, they'd take a bulldozer and bulldoze all the casings into piles where they just sit there and rust away in the weather. And Morissette went deer hunting. He didn't get a deer, and he thought to offset his costs, he ought to load up a bunch of those shell casings and sell them for scrap metal. And so he loaded up 3 tons of casing, took them to his house and flattened them out with a tractor, and then sold them for scrap metal and made $84. And he was indicted for stealing government property. And he told the investigator everything upon the first inquiry. He said, yeah, of course I took them. They're abandoned property there. And I made $84. What's the big deal? Proving that he did not act with criminal intent. He didn't intend to steal them. They would have wasted away right there. They're abandoned property. And the Supreme Court said, this is only a $200 fine, or the choice of, instead of paying the fine, you can go to prison for 2 months. And so it's totally insignificant, except for the way in U.S. District Court, the judge instructed the jury. He was totally out of line. And so the case is about the jury instruction and how this guy obviously lacked criminal intent for a common law felony of larceny. And so he's innocent. And this case was cited prominently in the case this summer that overturned a federal conviction. So in part number 2 of the seminar, I go to the losing courts and show what was overturned to show you the differences between the two. And the flash drive is on wevgov.com. And understand, my materials are pretty inexpensive. And you are supporting my efforts by buying the materials. I really appreciate it. And, of course, I'll accept any amount over and above what you see there. If you'd rather than donate money to me, let's say you bought all my properties and your pockets are deeper than that, keep buying my materials and give them to your friends when you receive them. I'd rather do that than take free contribution. So this criminal intent seminar, literally, if anybody out there is a tax movement or patriot movement aficionado, this has nothing to do with my tax findings. This has to do with whether or not the people that filed tax returns and got indicted, whoever's convicted out there, even state conviction. If it is a felony charge, mostly, this might even apply to some misdemeanors, they really need to know this angle on criminal intent, because I've seen a lot of people go to jail when in fact they shouldn't really have had a clue in the first place. They were breaking the law when they did what they did. So a new seminar that I just compiled, and it comes on a flash drive. You open the flash drive, watch the video segment. It's like watching, standing over somebody's shoulder, watching them navigate their own computer and reading the case law to you. And you have a bunch of documents as well. There will be in excess of 40 federal indictments, and you look at those indictments after you take the course to decide, I bet you they could get this indictment overturned, maybe this one, maybe not so much this other one here. There's a folder on that flash drive of indictments under 18 U.S.C. 2339B. rendering aid or financial assistance to a designated terrorist organization. To give you a view of some indictments.
Dave, can you give us that number again?
18 USC 2339B. And so you look at indictments that are hugely important, way more than the tax movement, which are nonviolent offenders. You look at somebody offering aid to a terrorist organization, and in light of these findings, look at the indictment and judge for yourself whether or not there might be some really bad dudes in prison that were not accused of acting with criminal intent in the indictment, and so their indictment should be vacated, and they can walk right out of prison because the DOJ has always set this standard aside to get innocent people in prison. This is because of the DOJ. It's not because of the defendant. And so the DOJ could be in real trouble. What if Gary Ridgway, the Greenway River murderer, serial killer, what if his state criminal complaint failed to allege that he acted with criminal intent? Under this argument, because the DOJ and state prosecutors never thought they really had to emphasize criminal intent, you could have some really bad people walking right out of prison, and now it's beyond the statute of limitations to prosecute them. So this argument, this tenet of criminal jurisprudence, could do a lot of damage.
This could be a very good This could be a very good
Pardon
backup.
me?
This could be a very good backup argument for Daniel Smith. His conviction should get vacated. They didn't let him put on a defense. I mean, you have to put on a defense. But the second one is to be able to prove criminal intent. I mean, if I can't see them keeping him in prison much longer.
And this course is, for my purposes, and in my opinion, a full expose. I don't feel I really have to do more research than I've done to write a competent brief for the Ninth Circuit. And when you look at my work here, you find the cases on your own circuit that say the same thing, to bring a briefing of this topic to relevance in your own circuit. I did this for the Ninth Circuit. I'm on the West Coast. I'm not going to do 11th Circuit's work for everybody in the country, but on the Supreme Court level, the Supreme Court really nailed the government, who wrote for 30 pages that we don't have to do this, and the Supreme Court says, yes, you do.
Well,
Yes,
it would be great for somebody to be able to rein in the DOJ. They're completely out of control.
Well, you have a bad attitude.
I'm sorry. Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged.
Yeah. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, exactly. When I read License to Lie, my hair was standing on end. Oh my gosh, that was just unbelievable what they do. And I've seen too many other cases. So somebody in the chat room has a question. We got, the people that are here are law dogs. I mean, they know stuff, and they're pretty good at what they know, as you can tell from some of their questions already. But they're asking, what do you know about declaratory judgments?
A declaratory judgment, it's under 28 USC 2201 and 2202. 2201 is declaratory judgments. 2202 is other relief, like an injunction. These do not apply to tax matters. Expressly. 2201 says, except in the instance of tax controversies. You can go to court and get the court to declare certain things to be true and present your issues at law. It is not a jurisdictional statute. It doesn't give the court jurisdiction. You have to plead jurisdiction under something else, like 28 USC 1331 or the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever amendments to the Constitution. That's another way to invoke the jurisdiction of the court. Or the 42 USC 1981, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So it's simply a procedural avenue into court that was written as a preemptive option where if you can see a controversy brewing, rather than have to have everything blow up on you, you can go to court first and have the court declare which way it should go, so that you can avoid the controversy.
Okay.
That's what a declaratory judgment is for. You're going to find an analog or a facsimile of the same statute in your state code.
Okay, I hope that answered that question for you. They're asking about your citizenship because you've announced yourself as a U.S. citizen.
No, I haven't. I have not. I simply said, they say I'm a citizen of the United States, and for the purposes of argument, okay. And then I go into the tax code and I prove that it's never been written to apply to that citizenship. And on wevgov.com, on the federal income taxation page, you're going to find an excerpt from each of 40 cases where people argued, hey, I'm not a citizen of the United States. And the courts disagreed and said, yes, you are. Here's the statute that imposes the graduated income tax. And this doesn't even include tax court. If I included tax court, I'm sure I could find more than 1,000 decisions against the contention that you're not a citizen of the United States. In fact, I have a 1992 memorandum from U.S. District Court Chief Judge, I think his name was John Voorhees in North Carolina, and he briefed his way out of the non-resident alien argument using the North Carolina state constitution itself and if you can't out-brief a U.S. District Court judge, you got no business making this argument. Secondly, back to the page on wevgov.com, on the federal income taxation page, you got 40 cases that said you're not a non-resident alien, you're a citizen of the United States, here's the statute that imposes that tax, and here's the regulation that says you owe it. And in none of those cases did they move from their argument. I'm a non-resident alien. They did not move from their argument to say, excuse me, but that's just a regulation. I did move. I don't make the argument about citizenship in the first place. I point out that in the statute, it doesn't make reference to anybody's citizenship, non-resident alien or otherwise. But in the regulation, it does. And you can't do that in a regulation. A regulation can only represent and implement what is found in the statute it seeks to implement. Checkmate. So
Okay.
I don't claim to be a citizen of the United States. I claim that the government can't succeed if, in fact, they're correct.
Okay. Well, I lost you, Dave. Hold on, let me see if I can get you back. Oh, gosh, we just lost Dave Myrland. We'll get him back
You
here.
didn't lose me. I can still hear you.
Oh, okay, we can hear you again now. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, well, while we're taking a little break here, I want to let everyone know you're listening to Sacred Cow Barbecue. I'm your host, Patricia Aiken. I'm just an average host, and you can tell I have exceptional guests. Mine tonight is Dave Myrland from wevgov.com, and he is an expert on the U.S. tax code and other matters, but tax is his specialty, not liens and levies, but criminal procedures with the IRS. And you're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and I just want to encourage you to support the station. Make a donation, go to Freedom Slips. If you don't want to make a donation, buy something. I mean, we got cool stuff over there. I mean, those seed packets that Hawk has for sale are very, very impressive. I mean, they've got all kinds of shelf life on those. That would be a great thing to have if this thing really hits the fan like everyone thinks it's going to. So we're listener and volunteer supported, so please go on over there and make a donation. And if everybody did that, everybody that listens just even threw in a couple bucks a month, we wouldn't have to make these appeals. So we appreciate it. And I want to let you know, Dennis Fetcho, say thanks to him again tonight for using his chat room at InsideTheEyeLive.com. He's on Saturday mornings. Check the schedule and you'll find out when he's on in your area. And you also want to listen to Karen Smith on Saturday afternoons. Now she's about an hour later, about 2 o'clock Eastern Time in Studio B, Radio Free South Africa. Always has great guests. So come on out and support our friends here. So Dave, back to you. How we doing? What do we need? What else do we need to talk about here tonight?
Well, hey, current events. The story of the day is Islam. And if you go to wevgov.com, I want you to look at a very particular page. Get into the website by clicking Enter on the home page, and you'll see a menu column on the left once you're in the website. And the links on the left-hand side, click on Federal Criminal Statute. It's at the bottom of that little list you see on the left-hand side. And these are the criminal statutes that I feel are most germane to the government and its abuses. I'm a big fan of criminal complaints. I love writing criminal complaints against public servants. And I have to tell you, in the early 90s, mid-90s, I'd look at the prosecutor in court, how they could put somebody in jail with just a paragraph on one page of paper. How the hell do they do that? I'm over here writing 15-page briefs, looking at case law and everything. I started studying government, the prosecutor's job, and studying why cases get dismissed. And I lived on a steady diet of case law. And I finally read the criminal code because the prosecutor asked to know the criminal code. And I said, excuse me, but this is the government's home address here. This is where they live. With all these abuses, I started finding statute after statute after statute that describes what they do and calls it a crime. So you scroll down this list of federal criminal statutes to the end of the list, and you see a photograph of our favorite president behind bars. Just above that, you find 18 U.S.C. 23, 81, 83, and 84. Consider, in light of these statutes, treason, rebellion or insurrection, and seditious conspiracy, view the preference by some for Sharia law in the United States in light of these statutes. And I conclude, you make your own decisions. You're an American, you're an adult. Look at these statutes and try to convince yourself that promoting Sharia law is not, in fact, treason, rebellion or insurrection, and seditious conspiracy. Because if you promote any type of law that conflicts with our Constitution or state or federal law, you're a felon, period, under these three statutes. 1, 2, or all three of them. And on the left-hand side of the website, you'll see a link that says citizen's arrest of a felon. Click on that, and on this page, you've got circuit by circuit quotes from cases about the citizen's arrest of a felon. Coast to coast, you can arrest a felon. And so if somebody promotes Sharia law, I'm talking about inside the mosque or even on the street in a demonstration, you got a population of Muslims that are huge in Lansing, Michigan, and Dearborn, Michigan. If they're out in the street saying Sharia law, they're committing a felony, and they can be arrested on the spot. And we shouldn't have to take this. Sharia law is a felony in the United States because we have laws that protect the laws that have been established. And it's terrible what happened in Paris, and I don't have a moment to absorb all the videos that say it's a false flag attack. It was terrible.
Well, I don't think anything. I think it was a Sandy Hook type thing. The videos that I've seen,
whatever it was or wasn't. Okay, I don't have enough calories in this lifetime to weigh everything that happens as to whether or not it was a false flag attack. Aside from that, what is happening to Europe is a tragedy.
I'm not going to argue with you there, Dave. I agree that this. We only have a disagreement on who's behind it.
Disagree because I'm not going to study it, but all the reasons I would have traveled in the past to go to Europe are gone. Sweden is the rape capital of the United States, Norway, or of the world. and Norway is right behind them. My grandparents were from Norway. I got relatives in Norway. I'm not going. And what's happening to Europe is a tragedy. And if people knew more about their own rights and about the law, you go to your own state code and see what your justifiable homicide statute has to say about your right to protect yourself against any offense. An example, New Mexico, 30-2-7, Texas, 9.23, Washington State, 9A16050. And then you look at the conduct of these radical Muslims or some Muslim communities in their entirety and wonder to yourself if you don't have, in fact, the right to protect yourself with necessary violence. There's justifiable homicide. There's self-defense statutes. Study those statutes in correlation with what plenty of these communities demand you undergo in the form of lifestyle changes, and a lot of times they're out of line.
Well, Dave, of course they're out of line, and this is the controlled demolition of European peoples and European Americans and Europeans all around the world. It's all an attack against whites.
And that's big picture. I'm talking about small picture, about the individual. If you knew more about the law, you'd see that you don't have to be in the situation so many people find themselves in, because they in fact have rights against being treated the way they're treated by these
but I'm just going to play devil's advocate here for a minute and say, but I think if you would go out and exercise those rights, you would find yourself in prison, because the courts are never going to support that. And we know the courts are as corrupt as the day is long, and they are behind them, the banks, the court, the whole system here, this beast system that we're living under, is behind this controlled demolition of our culture.
I didn't say exercise those rights. There's a step that comes before that, and that is open discussion of those rights. Here's what I would do. I would file in U.S. District Court for a declaratory judgment that in certain circumstances, if I perform a citizen's arrest, I am within my rights to do so, so that you get the courts involved first. You go full disclosure so that you can prove everything happened right out in the open. I believe I was lawful at all times. What did you just do? You defeated the essential element of criminal intent. I'm not going to do it. It doesn't concern me. I don't have a dog in this fight, and I'm busy with a bunch of other really important stuff. But for the people who feel that are on this front, and there are a lot of people fighting this battle, if they knew more about the law, they could go to court and probably get a judgment that, yeah, if somebody's holding the Koran, then you can presume it's not wrongful to presume that they subscribe to these ideologies that put your family at risk.
Well, I don't think all Muslims do. I know people that live in Muslim countries, and they've found those to be gracious hosts and don't support this ideology whatsoever. And I just say Muslims should live in Muslim countries, Europeans should live in European countries, and Africans should live in African countries.
But that's not the way things are. I think it was Dearborn, Michigan, maybe Lansing, Michigan, I can't remember which, just got a majority Muslim city council. And so they're going to be here. But if they're here, we shouldn't have to deal with, as we did in L.A., with entire blocks of streets blocked off because they're crowded with Muslims that are praying. In New York, they started to write tickets to the Muslims that do that, fining them for blocking the streets.
Yeah, that situation in Dearborn was kind of interesting because the county councilor, I think it was the city council, county council, I forget which one, but when they got elected, they started talking about, that Polish woman and stuff, and they were like shocked that they were being profiled. But this is the thing that white people don't do. They do not vote for their own best interest. They try to be, it's been so beaten out of them to vote for their best interest that this is how this has happened in our country, that non-whites have been able to take over our country. And it's been a
And
controlled demolition.
For those that aren't so sheepish, if you wanted to know more about your rights, trust me, you'll discover that you have a lot of rights against having to tolerate what Muslim communities feel they can force. Like a bakery has to serve a gay person, but a Muslim bakery does not. And this political correctness has to go. It's screwing up half of the population that doesn't subscribe to it. So,
Yeah,
anyway,
that's pretty crazy.
I just wanted to tell your listeners that if you look at your self-defense statutes and justifiable homicide statutes compared to a lot of the conduct that has happened, like in Michigan, Muslims out in the street throwing bricks at Christians, and conduct that is going to happen, which it's headed here. It amazes some experts that it hasn't happened already. Here comes the Christmas season. I'm not going to sit here and say that I bet it's going to happen, but we are on the cusp of having explosive vests detonated in shopping malls at Christmas time. So along those lines, anywhere in between, there's going to be conduct you should know whether or not you can address with self-defense.
Well, I have to say everything that I've read and watched so far about the Paris bombing situation is that nobody died. There were no real bombs. And again, it's just a media circus and just more theater of that we live in. We live in the Matrix. So little of it's real. I'm glad that no one died. I don't see any evidence for that. And I've watched as many videos as I could because I know we were going to talk about this tonight.
But on the other hand, you got this photograph that claims it's of the same woman who's a fear actor that has appeared.
Oh, the crisis actor woman, right?
Yeah. And that photo was debunked, saying, here's one woman, and we interviewed her, and it's a close-up. She's obviously the girl in the picture, but a different girl that was in the other pictures. So
no, I don't. I don't know about that. I saw it, and her hair's parted on the other side, and what have you. She does look like the other women, but in that one doesn't matter to me. But when I see photographs and images of the so-called these cafes that was supposed to be bombed, all it looks like is somebody threw the chairs around. I mean, and then I look at pictures of actual bombings in a cafe in the Middle East, and that looks like bomb damage. There was no blood found. There was no, I mean, they're ridiculous. These things are just patently ridiculous anymore. And I don't know what the agenda is behind it, but there definitely is one.
Yeah, again, I don't have the time or the calories to get into whether or not something's a false flag. There's a million people studying it. I just know that there are times when it's not a false flag, and so it's not really worth anybody's time to even discuss it. If you're into it, go study it. But I'm not into it one bit. It's
well,
it's
I know you. I don't like to be Islamophobic. You know, I don't. I think European Americans, you know, should be able to have the right of association and live amongst the people that they want to live amongst, and not be have forced integration on us. And all the miscegenation that they push on oh my God, the media is just full on that. And I don't think ISIS is real any more than I thought that Al-Qaeda was real. These are ISIS, and you can see all the evidence for this, only stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, period. Al-Qaeda was the same thing. I mean, this is all done out of Tel Aviv, with the U.S. cooperation with it. So it's just a controlled demolition, and I'm not saying that those people, I don't agree with honor murders. I don't agree with any of those protesters that you see in Europe yelling and screaming. I think it's all disgusting, and hopefully it's been so rapid that the people of Europe will wake up and stand up against this, because it's coming here next. I mean, this is going on and on. I feel like our enemies have a vested interest in getting rid of European people all over the world, because we're the only people that stand up. Everybody else will go along with their plan. They're all collectivists, unlike Europeans that are too individual.
But to even say that, you're admitting that not everything is a false flag. I'm talking about the things that are not a false flag. I'm talking about whether or not something is or is not a false flag. There are things that are not. You just acknowledge there are things that are not. That's all I'm concerned with.
Okay, well,
and if you knew,
that's fine.
If you knew your rights, against somebody that says we need different law than you got here, well, you better stay away from my children. I'm going to protect the laws that are here, and if you're against them, you're a felon. I can arrest you, so you shut your mouth about everything you think is good about Sharia, or I'll arrest you.
Well, Dave, so has anyone been successful with that yet, with the citizen's arrest on some of these issues yet? Or any issue? Has anyone been successful with citizen's arrest in the last 20 years, say?
You look at the case law that I quoted, I excerpted right on my my citizen's arrest page. There's a bunch of cases, circuit by circuit, where people made citizen's arrest. And secondly, I can't find Americans that are very interested in the law anyway, and so it's going to come down to warfare. It'll never be the operation of the law that solves our problems. I can't get people interested in the law. They're too distracted by the football game or Oprah or Beyonce or whatever, and pop culture, it turns your brain off. And so,
well, you know what's funny about you saying that is because we have people that are nationalists, and they complain that the white people that should be interested in this are just around studying the law. So I know there are people studying the law, and so it's a funny situation. One way or another, we are distracted from what's going on in the world, and we need to wake up, because no culture has ever recovered from 4%, and we have only 2% of the world's population are white women of childbearing age. We are done as a race. We are done as a culture. And then you look at all the miscegenation that they push on television. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, children this day and age are surrounded from cradle to the grave by the filth of society. They grow up in an adult world full of filthy notions and profanity, and then you wonder why they're in the theater in Colorado shooting people up or wherever. You wonder why they fail in the ways they fail when you surround them with failure from the time they're born. And in 1980, the television industry still had respect for my living room. And in 1985, that was all gone. You got the mainstream channels competing with Showtime and HBO with subtle profanity and nudity, sharp language, whatever, and it just escalated from there. And then in the music scene, 1980, rap is music. Now what is rap? It's an excuse for oversexed, criminally insane, mentally retarded poverty victims to shout and swear about the worst things imaginable right into your child's headphones.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think this is, we can see who's behind it. Who's behind this?
So I haven't watched television in years.
Me neither.
It's disgusting. It's a parade of people I wouldn't let feed my dog.
I know when in the 80s, or early 90s at least, I saw television I hadn't watched in probably 10 years, and I sat down and I was shocked by what was on television. I mean, if you took somebody from 1950 that was maybe 70 years old in 1950 and you put them in front of a television today, they would throw up. Look, somebody wants to know, they keep asking me about the Lufkin case, and I don't know what the Lufkin case is. Do you?
I heard that name recently. I can't remember exactly the topic.
Nope. Sorry, we can't remember the topic. You'll have to give us more information to go on. So, David, I think the media, the government, the banks, they're all controlled by the same people. And if you look at, and as Joel Stein said, he doesn't care who, that people say that the Jews run Hollywood and Wall Street and the banks and Big Pharma, just as long as they get to keep doing it.
Now, I want you to listen closely. This is a 1951 Supreme Court case. Radio Corporation of America. Anybody want to write this case site down? It's 341 U.S. 412. 341 U.S. 412. Radio Corporation of America versus United States. And this was about the format they were going to use for color television. And the Supreme Court makes an astonishing reference here. It's the only Supreme Court case I could find that mentions mental retardation. Listen to this. One of the more important sources of the retardation or regression of civilization is man's tendency to use new inventions indiscriminately or too hurriedly without adequate reflection of long-range consequences. No doubt the radio enlarges man's horizon, but by making him a captive listener, it may make for spiritual impoverishment. Indiscriminate use of the radio denies him of the opportunities for reflection and for satisfying those needs of withdrawal, of which silent prayer is only one manifestation. It is an uncritical assumption that every form of reporting or communication is equally adaptable to every situation. Thus, there may be a mode of what is called reporting that may defeat the pursuit of justice.
Oh, that's a great quote there, Dave. It really is, because that's why they call it television and radio programming. That's all it is. It has been programming us, and the gradualism, or some people call it incrementalism, has taken us down the garden path and has led to this complete and total degradation of our culture. We're coming up on the end of the show. Parting remarks. I think the music's going to start here any minute.
The criminal complaint seminar is hot. If anybody knows anybody that's in the anti-tax movement, you don't want to learn this after you've been indicted. You want to know this and carry it with you everywhere you go. You get the criminal complaint seminar on wevgov.com. Download my talk show episodes. Click on my YouTube link in the menu column of the website. Those are free seminars. It's been my pleasure, Patricia. Please have me on again.
Oh, I'd love to have you come back as often as you like, Dave. You just let us know. We'd love to have you. So what days are your talk show? What days are you on talk show?
On 87488, we typically have a call on Saturday, noon Pacific, and on Wednesdays at 4 Pacific. Listen into those shows in the next couple of weeks. I imagine we'll have a decision from the federal court case about whether or not the lawsuit will continue. My bet is that they'll dismiss it, but at least those results will be in, and I'll be glad to fill you in on that if you just tune into the call.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you've been listening to Dave Myrland from wevgov.com. Dave is always a wealth of information, and he's told you where you can go to get more. So I hope you'll go and support his website there and all the information. Get that criminal intent stuff. Like he said, the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. And so you need to have this information under your belt before you need it. That's what I always find with people that are, want to learn about natural health. By the time they get a scary diagnosis, it's way too late for that. You have to be in it now. So, enlightening show, Dave. I've really appreciated it, and I hope Chappie's all better soon.
He should be back on his feet by Saturday for the call we have. And in closing, before you let me go, let me say that there once was a man named Beebe who wished to marry a lady named Phoebe, but he said, "Wait and see what the clerical fee be before Phoebe be Phoebe be."
Very good, Dave Myrland. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. See you. We won't see you next week for Thanksgiving. Take care now.